The sky isn't blue anymore. It's the color of burning oil and Junkers steel. The world's largest military machine, a wall of 10 million men, is being unzipped like a cheap coat. It wasn't just an invasion. It was a tactical execution. How did a superpower's, the Soviets' impenetrable wall, collapse against a single week of lightning? The high command was looking for a hammer, but the enemy was a scalpel. But history got it wrong. While the generals panicked, they ignored the girl in the recruitment line. They saw a history student with soft features and ink-stained fingers. They laughed because a dress didn't fit their manual. They saw a nurse. She saw the windage. Why did the powerful system ignore the only tactic that could save them? The answer wasn't in the classified vaults, but in the hands of a librarian who knew how to hold her breath. June 22nd, 1941. The sun rises over the Black Sea, but the warmth is a lie. In the distance, the horizon begins to ripple. The peace of a Sunday morning is not broken by a shout, but by a low rhythmic thrumming that vibrates in the marrow of the bone. It is the sound of 3 million men, 7,000 artillery pieces, and 2,000 aircraft crossing a border that no longer exists. Operation Barbarossa has begun. In the city of Odessa, the panic is silent at first. It manifests as a frantic, quiet movement toward the center of town. People are not screaming. They are walking with a terrifying, singular purpose. Among them is Lyudmila. She is not a soldier. She is a scholar. She spends her days in the hush of the University of Kiev, her fingers tracing the maps of ancient battles, her mind occupied by the rise and fall of empires long since turned to dust. She understands the cycle of history. She knows that when the system fails, it is the individuals who are ground between the gears. She finds herself standing in a recruitment line that curls around the block like a dying snake. The air is thick with the smell of cheap tobacco, sweat, and the ozone of impending rain. The men around her are restless, their voices a low murmur of bravado and fear. They look at her, and then they look away. In 1941, the Soviet Union prides itself on equality, but it is a hollow promise. War is still a man's business, a matter of muscle, shouting, and mass. When she finally reaches the front of the line, she meets the face of the system. The recruitment officer is a man who lives by the manual. His eyes are bloodshot, his uniform stained with the coffee of 1,000 frantic hours. He doesn't see a defender of the motherland. He sees a problem to be solved. He looks at her slender frame, her delicate hands, and the way she carries herself with a poise that doesn't belong in the mud. "We need nurses," he says, his voice flat, dismissing her before she can even speak. "The medical tents are that way. Go. You can help the boys when they come back broken." It is a moment of crystallized arrogance. To this man, and the millions like him, the Soviet war machine is an engine of sheer weight. They believe that victory is found in the human wave, the idea that if you throw enough bodies at a problem, the problem eventually disappears. They do not want precision. They do not want intelligence. They want meat for the grinder. But Lyudmila does not move. She reaches into her bag and produces a small, crumpled piece of paper. It is a certificate from the WWII, a civilian marksmen's club. It states, in cold, bureaucratic ink, that she is a sharpshooter. The officer laughs. It is a dry, cynical sound that echoes in the cramped office. He treats her skill like a hobby, a parlor trick for a girl who spent too much time at the local fair. He believes that shooting a paper target in a controlled environment has nothing to do with the real war. War isn't a sport, girl, he sneers. It's a slaughterhouse. Go to the hospital. She is a ghost in the machine, already seeing the failure he is blind to. While the officer clings to the safety of his rank and his prejudices, Lyudmila is already calculating the windage. She knows something he doesn't. The German army isn't a wave. It's a precision instrument. And you don't stop a scalpel with a hammer. You stop it with a needle. The high command scoffed at the quiet reports filtering in from the border, believing the German advance would choke on its own ambition. They treated the warnings of their own intelligence officers as tremors of cowardice. But they had fatally underestimated the speed of the predator. It wasn't a slow invasion. It was a lightning strike aimed directly at the heart of their pride. While the generals toasted to their impenetrable borders, the panzer divisions were already unzipping the front lines, preparing to show the world that a system built on blind obedience is the first to burn. The officer's order is final. Report to the hospital or face the firing squad for insubordination. Lyudmila does neither. In the smoke of a bombed-out supply depot, she commits an act of treason. She steals a Mosin Nagant from a pile of the dead. She is no longer just a scholar. She is a ghost operating outside the law. To the Red Army, she is a deserter. To the Germans, she is a shadow. She crawls into the tall grass, knowing that her own side will hang her for theft of state property if she returns without a body count high enough to buy her life back. Every pull of the trigger isn't just a kill, it's a plea for a pardon. He expects her to die in the first trench, a forgotten statistic of the initial retreat. The weapon is a Mosin Nagant, 1891-30. In the language of the soldier, this is not a tool. It is an iron rod with a soul of fire. It is heavy, nearly 4 feet of wood and steel that feels like a dead weight to the uninitiated. The mechanism is a masterpiece of brutal simplicity. To fire, you must manually rotate the bolt, pull it back to eject the spent brass, and shove it forward to seat a new 5-round clip into the chamber. It is a black box of kinetic energy. The trigger pull is not a click. It is a deliberate, heavy brake. When the firing pin strikes the primer, it ignites a charge that sends a 148-grain lead slug screaming out of the barrel at over 2,800 feet per second. The recoil is a physical assault, a kick that can bruise a shoulder and disorient the mind. It is a weapon that demands respect, or it will betray you. Lyudmila takes the rifle. She doesn't flinch at its weight. She doesn't struggle with the bolt. To her, this isn't a piece of industrial hardware. It is a pen, and the history she's about to write will be etched into the ruins of Odessa. She is sent to the 25th Chapayev Rifle Division. She is given a uniform that is too large, boots that chafe her heels, and the constant, biting mockery of the men who are supposed to be her brothers in arms. They call her the little historian. They wait for her to cry, for her to break when the first mortar screams overhead. They do not realize that while they were learning to march, she was learning to disappear. While they were learning to follow orders, she was learning to observe the world through a glass lens. As the German army closes the ring around Odessa, the sky turns a bruised purple from the smoke of burning oil. The system is failing. The human wave is being mowed down by the thousands. The arrogance of the generals has led them into a trap of their own making. And in the center of the chaos, the girl who was told to go to the hospital is beginning to crawl into the tall grass. The transition from the libraries of Kiev to the mud-choked trenches of the Crimean Peninsula is not merely a change of scenery, it is a descent into a specific kind of hell. By January 1942, the city of Sevastopol is no longer a port. It is a jagged wound on the edge of the Black Sea. The air here doesn't just carry the scent of salt, it carries the copper tang of blood and the heavy, sweet rot of a city that has become its own graveyard. While the Soviet High Command scrambles to reorganize its shattered divisions, Lyudmila has found her rhythm. She has stopped being a student of history. She has become the shadow that haunts it. The German officers, safe behind their lines, treat the siege of Sevastopol as a mathematical certainty. They look at their maps, their heavy Krupp artillery, and their impeccably trained infantry, and they see a countdown. They believe that a city surrounded by steel must eventually yield to the logic of the machine. They enjoy their morning coffee in stolen villas, convinced that the Russian rabble is merely delaying the inevitable. But they have fatally underestimated the silence. They treated the stillness of the ruins as a sign of a broken enemy. They believed the rubble was empty, but it wasn't a void, it was a hunting ground. While the German commanders toasted to their inevitable victory, the true master of the ruins was already adjusting her cheek against the cold wood of a Mosin Nagant. It wasn't surrender they were hearing in the quiet. It was the final breath of a system about to be dismantled, one bullet at a time. Lyudmila's weapon is now fitted with a PU 3.5X telescopic sight. It is a simple tube of steel and glass, but it changes the physics of the battlefield. The black box of the long-distance kill is a brutal calculation of variables that the human mind was never meant to process in a state of panic. To hit a target at 500 meters, she must account for the cold bore effect, the way a frozen barrel slightly alters the trajectory of the first shot. She must factor in the Coriolis effect and the invisible river of wind that pulls at the lead slug. The bullet doesn't fly in a straight line. It travels in a parabolic arch, rising and then falling like a heavy stone thrown across a pond. If her breathing is off by a fraction of a millimeter, the shot misses. If the target moves an inch, the hunt begins again. It is a mechanical failure of the highest order. The machine can only do so much. The rest is the soul of the shooter. She spends 18 hours at a time in a hide. This is not a position. It is a test of biological endurance. She lies in the freezing slush, her body going numb, her heart rate slowing until she is indistinguishable from the earth itself. She does not eat. She does not move. She allows the insects to crawl over her skin. She becomes a ghost before she ever pulls the trigger. In the command bunkers, the skepticism remains. A high-ranking commissar, a man with soft hands and a chest full of medals for political reliability, stands over her logbook. He flips through the pages, his lip curling in a sneer. 309? He asks, his voice dripping with the arrogance of a man who has never seen the enemy's eyes through a lens. You expect me to believe a Kiev schoolgirl has more kills than an entire platoon of my best men? This is propaganda, a fairy tale to boost the morale of the peasants. He looks at her, expecting a defensive outburst or a tearful plea for belief. But Lyudmila just stares back. Her eyes are no longer those of a scholar. They are the flat, obsidian eyes of a predator. "If you doubt the Count," she says, her voice as cold as the Crimean frost, "come into the no man's land with me. I will show you where they lie. But wear your brightest metals. I wouldn't want to lose you in the gray." The commissar turns away, but the seed of discomfort is planted. He represents a system that cannot understand individual excellence unless it is sanctioned by a committee. He fears her because she has bypassed the bureaucracy of death. But the Germans no longer laugh. They have given her a name, Pauk der Tod, Lady Death. They have felt the sting of her precision. They have seen their colonels drop in the middle of a sentence, the back of their skulls vanishing before the sound of the shot even reaches their ears. The German High Command, frustrated by the ghost of Sevastopol, decides to fight fire with fire. They fly in an elite counter-sniper, a man rumored to be a master of the hunt. He is the personification of the Reich's industrial arrogance. He has the best equipment, the best training, and a belief that he is the apex predator. For 3 days, they play a game of shadows in the ruins of a burned-out flour mill. It is a dance of microscopic movements. The German waits for her to blink. Lyudmila waits for him to breathe. She realizes his position not by seeing him, but by noticing a slight change in the reflection of a shard of glass in a window 200 yards away. It is a eureka moment, born from her years in the archives. She knows that every human, no matter how trained, leaves a pattern. He is following the manual. He is positioned where the textbook says a sniper should be. She, however, is lying in a pile of rotting horse carcasses, the stench so thick it would make a normal person retch. Because she was an outsider, she saw the problem differently. While the expert looked for a tactical advantage, the scholar looked for the human error hidden in the routine. She uses a decoy, a helmet propped up on a stick. The German fires. The black box of his rifle functions perfectly. The bullet strikes the helmet with a dull clang. But in that split second, he reveals himself. He leans forward just an inch to confirm his kill. Lyudmila doesn't think. She doesn't hesitate. The Mosin Nagant kicks against her shoulder. The 148-grain slug travels the distance in less than half a second. It finds the German's eye, ending the myth of his superiority before his brain can even process the flash. She crawls to his body under the cover of a sudden snowstorm. She takes his logbook. He was her 309th. As she retreats back to the Soviet lines, her body is screaming. She has been hit by shrapnel 4 times. She has suffered concussions that make the world spin in sickening circles. But the physical pain is nothing compared to the psychological weight. In the silence of the night, she doesn't see the medals. She doesn't hear the praise of the soldiers who now worship her as a goddess of war. She sees the faces, not as targets, but as men. She carries the 309 ghosts with her, an invisible army of the dead that follows her through the ruins. The system wanted a symbol. They wanted a poster of a heroic woman to inspire the masses. But what they got was a broken human being who had traded her soul for the survival of a city that was already burning. The Russian Valkyrie is falling apart, but the world is only just beginning to learn her name. August 1942. Washington, D.C. The air is a thick, humid blanket that smells of wet pavement and expensive tobacco. Lyudmila stands in the East Room of the White House, a world away from the frozen craters of the Crimea. She is no longer wearing the oversized, mud-caked fatigues of a sniper. She is draped in the heavy wool of a Soviet dress uniform, her chest a canvas of medals that catch the light of the crystal chandeliers. Beside her stands Eleanor Roosevelt. The First Lady sees a woman who has looked into the abyss. The American press, however, sees a curiosity. To them, she is not a soldier who held the line against the greatest war machine in history. She is a girl sniper, a novelty, an exotic guest in a land that has not yet felt the sting of a foreign boot on its soil. The American system is not one of iron commissars, but of flashing bulbs and vapid curiosity. They treat the war as a distant theater, a radio play where the stakes are headlines, not heartbeats. A reporter from a major daily paper steps forward, his notebook poised like a weapon. He doesn't ask about the windage at 500 yards or the weight of the ghosts she carries. He looks at her uniform, his eyes tracing the line of her skirt with a dismissive, paternalistic smirk. "Tell us, Lieutenant," he says, his voice carrying the crystallized arrogance of a man who believes war is strictly a masculine privilege. "Do you find that the cut of your uniform makes you look too stout? And what about lipstick? Does a woman who has killed 300 men still care about the color of her lips?" It is the final insult. The system of the West is mocking the very survivor it claims to support. They are trying to turn a predator back into a porcelain doll. Lyudmila stands perfectly still. In her mind, she isn't in a ballroom. She is back in the tall grass, waiting for the reflection in the glass. She realizes that the American men are not looking for a hero. They are looking for a reason to stay home. They are hiding behind the Atlantic, safe in their luxury, while her sisters are being buried in mass graves. The room goes quiet, a heavy, expectant hush. She leans into the microphone. Her voice isn't the scream of a shell. It's the precise clinical snap of a firing pin. "Gentlemen," she says, her English measured and sharp, "I am 25 years old, and I have killed 309 fascist occupants by now. Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" The silence that follows is deafening. It is the sound of a superpower's ego being punctured by a single sentence. In that moment, the Lady Death of the East forces the men of the West to look into the mirror. She shatters the glass ceiling, not with a hammer, but with the cold truth of her own existence. To help us uncover the rest of the story, please subscribe. The victory, however, carries a bitter aftertaste. Lyudmila returns to a Soviet Union that is finally winning, but the price of her fame is a permanent exile from the life she once knew. She is never allowed to return to the front. The system decides she is too valuable as a symbol to be risked as a soldier. They turn the master of the hunt into a desk-bound historian, a living monument whose voice is slowly muffled by the very state she saved. She spent the rest of her years in the quiet hallways of the Ministry of the Navy, a woman who had seen the end of the world and was now expected to file its paperwork. When Eleanor Roosevelt visited her in Moscow years later, she found a woman living in a cramped apartment, her eyes still holding the flat, distant stare of the Crimean winter. the world had moved on, turning her into a statistic in a textbook, a number that the history books mention but never truly explain. We see this same hubris today. We see it when we underestimate the quietest voice in the room, or when we believe that a system's protocol is more important than an individual's truth. We live in a world that still tries to dress its warriors in silk to make their stories more palatable. Lyudmila Pavlichenko was the most lethal woman to ever pull a trigger, not because she was a Valkyrie, but because she was a human being who refused to be ignored. She reminded us that when the machines fail and the generals flee, the only thing left between us and the darkness is the person who is willing to wait in the mud. If you believe that stories like Lyudmila's deserve to be remembered, join our ranks by subscribing, like. We have synthesized this narrative from reputable historical archives and verified sources. However, the fog of war often extends to the history books. If you spot any inaccuracies or have additional details to share, please correct us in the comments. We strive for the absolute truth, and your knowledge helps us get there. Thank you for keeping history alive.